It all began on the bank of a cold river. Let's go back in time a little, not too far, just about 350 years, the late 1600s. In what is today Belgium, there were small villages along the Meuse River. One of the favorite foods of the villagers there was the small fish they caught from the river. They would slice these fish into thin strips, fry them in oil, and make them the highlight of their evening meals. But every year in winter, the river would freeze. Once the river froze, fishing became impossible. Yet the villagers didn't want to forget the taste of that fried fish. One day, one of the village women standing in her kitchen thought to herself, if there's no fish, can't we find something like it? Her eyes landed on the potatoes in the pantry. She cut the potatoes into thin strips, just like fish, and threw these thin potato pieces into hot oil. The fried potatoes turned a golden color, crispy on the outside, soft on the inside. And so, without anyone realizing it, one of the world's most beloved snacks was born. Back then, no one could have imagined that this simple village solution would end up on tables all around the world centuries later. So, where did the potato itself come from? This is where things get interesting. Just like the tomato, the potato's homeland wasn't Europe either. Potatoes had been grown for thousands of years in the Andes Mountains of South America in what is now Peru and Bolivia. When Spanish explorers reached South America in the 1500s, they discovered this strange lump that grew from the ground and carried it back to Europe. But Europeans didn't trust this new vegetable at first either, just as they hadn't trusted the tomato. Some believed the potato was poisonous. Others saw it only as animal feed. For many years in much of Europe, the potato remained a scorned vegetable. But for the villagers of the Meuse Valley, the potato was both cheap and filling. They didn't turn their backs on this humble vegetable that filled their stomachs in hard times. Over time, these thinly sliced fried potatoes were made not just in winter, but in every season of the year, because they tasted so good that people no longer even needed the fish. By the 18th century, these fried potato strips had become common both in today's Belgium and in the neighboring northern regions of France. Street vendors began frying potatoes in large pots at marketplaces and selling them wrapped in paper. On Paris's crowded bridges, especially on the Pont Neuf, the street vendors selling fried potatoes became so famous that this food eventually came to be called Pomme Pont Neuf potatoes. So why did the name become French fries when the story had begun in Belgium? This is where one of history's sweetest mix-ups comes into play. According to some historians, the roots of this naming confusion trace back to World War I. During the war, American soldiers stationed in Belgium tasted these delicious fried potatoes and fell in love with them. But in the southern regions of Belgium, the language spoken was French. When the soldiers heard the language of the people preparing this dish, they assumed the food came from France too. And when they returned home, telling stories about this delicacy, they started calling it French fries. And so a dish that was actually a Belgian invention came to be known around the world as a French food. To this day, Belgians object with a smile but firm conviction, we invented French fries. But there's another branch to the story, and it takes us to one of America's most important names. The year's the late 1700s. Thomas Jefferson, who would become the third president of the United States, was serving as ambassador in France. During his years in Paris, he became enamored with French cuisine and learned many new recipes. One of them was pommes de terre frites en petites tranches, meaning potatoes fried in thin slices. Jefferson loved this recipe so much that when he returned to America, he had his own chef prepare it. In fact, records show that at a dinner he hosted at the White House in 1802, he served his guests French fried potatoes. And so, French fries first stepped onto American soil from a president's own dinner table. But it would take a little more time for this delicacy to truly enter the lives of ordinary people. Toward the late 1800s, a great wave of migration began from Europe to America. Germans, Italians, Irish, and of course Belgians crossed the Atlantic Ocean in hope of a better life. Some of these immigrants brought with them not only their hopes, but their culinary traditions. In small restaurants opening in big cities like New York and Chicago, fried potatoes began appearing on menus. Americans quickly fell in love with this crispy, golden food. But the real explosion that would spread French fries across the world hadn't happened yet. By the mid-1900s, life in America was also picking up speed. People no longer wanted to sit down for long meals. They wanted quick, practical, and tasty options. This is exactly where fast food chains like McDonald's McDonald's stepped onto the scene. As the McDonald brothers simplified their restaurant's menu, they turned French fries into a standardized product too. Fries cut to the same thickness, fried at the same temperature, and salted in the same proportion began to be served at every location. This standardization became a true turning point in the history of French fries. Now, no matter where in the world you were, walking into a McDonald's meant finding that same familiar taste. Soon, other chains like Burger King and Wendy's began offering their own versions of French fries. Each brand developed its own recipe. Some preferred a thin, crispy cut, others favored a thick cut with a soft interior. When fast food culture began spreading from America to the world in the 1950s and 1960s, French fries joined that journey too. They returned to Europe, but this time with a whole new identity, a global phenomenon. They reached Asia. In Japan and South Korea, they became a staple of restaurant menus. They reached South America, interestingly, returning to the very land where the potato had first been grown thousands of years earlier. They spread to Africa, Australia, the Middle East, and Turkey. Today, you can find a different take on French fries in nearly every country in the world. In Belgium, they're still made the traditional way, fried twice, first at a low temperature to cook through, then at a high temperature to crisp up. Belgians usually eat them with mayonnaise. In Canada, cheese curds and gravy are poured over French fries. This is called poutine. In the Netherlands, fries known as patat are served with dozens of different sauces. In France, the thin cut is still preferred, known as frite. In America, there's an endless variety, from thick-cut steak fries to thin shoestring fries. The next time you pick up a handful of hot, crispy French fries, remember this: you're actually tasting a very long journey, from a humble tuber growing high in the Andes Mountains to a curious vegetable crossing the Atlantic on Spanish ships, from a village woman's practical solution on the frozen bank of the Meuse River to the street vendor stalls on the bridges of Paris, from Thomas Jefferson's White House dinner table to a culinary tradition crossing the Atlantic Ocean on immigrant ships, and from there all the way to the paper box in your hand today. What a magnificent journey. Perhaps the world's crispiest history lesson is hidden inside a handful of French fries.